Well, it's spiritual practice of the month time again. It's the first Wednesday of the month, and I'm Pastor Mike, and here to bring you a little synopsis of what we're all going to do together while we're separate. Our practice this month is the practice of hospitality, of living a life of welcome. And here's a question you can discuss at dinner tonight. Are you a better guest or a better host? Which role do you prefer? And now, I asked the question on Epiphany. Today, on January 6th, is Epiphany, and we think about that story, how the wise men came and offered their welcome to baby Jesus in Matthew. They came, they were drawn, they followed a light, they were drawn to a light, and they came to the one they called the King of the Jews, bearing gifts worthy of a king. Our job then is to also come by whatever route we can find with the best gifts that we have and experience the welcome of being in that king's presence. Some years ago, Diana Butler Bass did a study, and she was looking for what characteristics mark a vital, growing, vibrant church. She came up with 10. But she said only one of those characteristics did she find in all of her church studies. Every church that was vital and alive shared this one characteristic for sure: hospitality. So 8 years ago, when Pastor Kent first joined our staff, he and I started to preach a series of sermons on how we make God visible by welcoming, sharing, and serving. And I drew the welcoming topic. And so I asked the members of Prince of Peace to tell me your stories of welcome, of being a stranger and then being welcomed into Prince of Peace. And you spoke and told me of these welcomes that you remember 20, 30, 40 years after they happened. Some talked about moving here in the 70s and how Marge Haugen stopped by your house. And she came with flowers and fresh tomatoes, and it has stuck with you ever since. Others said moving here in the 70s, being invited to Circle, or having Fred and Mary Lou Meyer come up to you and say, you should try our church. A couple of you mentioned the time when you visited church and Bill and Sarah and Joe and Joan greeted your children. And you said, this is a home for us. Others told the stories of moving into their house, and these people came over named Steve and Margene. The big tall guy asked if we were Packer fans, and then they both welcomed us to the neighborhood and told us about Prince of Peace. I like that story. More recently, a whole bunch of people joined us when Matt and Amy Todd were going through the neighborhood saying, our boys just love going to Jam Club and confirmation. Evidently, that was enough for a lot of young families to say, let's try out that church. I remember, I'll tell the truth, when Cindy Reichelt visited our church one time, and I saw her down in the fellowship hall getting some cookies to eat and visit with people. I ran upstairs to the 6th grade Sunday school room. There was like 17 of them in this room. And I said, your teacher is downstairs. And they absolutely ran out of the room, ran downstairs to greet Mrs. Reichelt. It probably wasn't fair, but it was a welcome. And now she's just getting off of our church council. Well, people were writing all about hugs and invitations, shared meals, and the obvious joy that was in Gene and Rita Gunderson's heart, what brought them to our church. You spoke of hospital visits and being treated like a member even when you weren't a member. There was the palpable comfort of being held in prayer on our prayer chains, or someone dropped off a prayer shawl at your house. It was all welcome. Years back, there was an award-winning movie called Chocolat. And in that movie fable, this young priest begins to realize that their little village, that was so traditional and never changing actually wasn't threatened by the diversity that was coming to the village. And on his Easter sermon, he surprised all the villagers by saying he didn't want to talk about Jesus' identity as divinity. He wanted to talk about Jesus' humanity and what we can learn from Jesus' life on earth. And then that young priest says this line: we measure goodness by what we embrace, by what we create, and who we include. He was talking about hospitality and welcome, because what we have most in common is not our religion, it's our humanity. And our faith teaches us to see that welcoming another human being is as close as we may ever get to God in the eye-to-eye, person-to-person connection, which is where Jesus promises to show up where 2 or 3 gather in his name, even if it's a Zoom meeting or a Facebook devotion. Be well. Amen.